Hey everyone, it's James, Fit RV, yada yada yada. So today we're going to talk about lithium battery systems. And specifically, we're going to talk about the two lithium battery systems offered by Winnebago. Now, I got to warn you, this is going to get a little bit long, but stick with it. Trust me, you're going to be a lot smarter at the end of this than you are right now about these two systems. So, Winnebago has spent a lot of time and effort over the past few years educating everyone on the lithium battery system in their Travato and Bolt models, which is made by Volta. So people know about Volta now, and everyone's comfortable with the system. That's good. Now the new Winnebago Echo also has a lithium battery system, and these systems are made by Lithionics. The Revel also has a Lithionics system for Revel owners out there. Anyway, the Lithionics system is not new. We've been using one for years in our own RV, and Coachman has been building it into their coaches for a few years now as well. Still, not as many people know about the Lithionics system, so I hope to change that here. Now we, Steph and I, are uniquely qualified to bring you this information because we have been using a Lithionics battery system in our own RV Lance for about 4 years now, and the technology improves rapidly, so the systems that Lithionics is installing today are better than what we were used to. And we also spent about 9 months camping in Parky, the very first limited edition National Park Foundation Travato, which had the Volta system. To my knowledge, we are the only people who have spent literally months camping in rigs with both of these systems. So we're not just reading spec sheets to you here, we have actually lived with both of the systems that we're talking about. So now, if you're thinking I'm going to tell you that one of these systems is awesome and the other one is crap, that's not going to happen. Both of these systems work. Both of these systems will provide the power you need, but they do have some differences. If I were drawing on a whiteboard, and I have a whiteboard right here, each of these systems would start out with the same general kind of boxes and arrows. First off, they both have a battery. So here's my representation of a battery, even though neither of them look anything like that. They both have a battery. They also both have second alternators, which, let's see, it looks probably something like this. Some terminals on there, second alternator. Now the alternator takes a little bit of power from the engine to charge the battery. And they also both have inverter chargers, and really those just look like boxes. But now the inverter chargers, they convert current from the DC to AC, so they're like AC, oh yeah, we're going there. AC-DC kind of appliances. And finally, they both have some sort of battery management system components that kind of keep all these things in check and talking to each other. Okay, so let's start by talking about battery chemistry. Now, the batteries in both of these systems can be considered lithium batteries, but they differ in the actual chemical makeup of what's in the battery cells. The cells in the Volta battery are lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide cells, and I'm just going to call those NMC for short, because I don't want to say that each time. And the cells in the Lithionics battery are lithium-ion iron phosphate cells, and I'll just call those lithium-ion or lithium-iron batteries. There we go. Now, if you didn't major in inorganic chemistry, that's okay. The important thing to know is that each of these batteries can store and deliver energy in the quantity and manner you need to run an RV's house components. The electricity out of one of these batteries isn't any different, better, or superior than the other, but there are some differences. So if you want a good place to go deep into a comparison between these two battery chemistries, I would recommend Battery University. You can find them online, and they have a handy page that compares and contrasts the different lithium battery chemistries. And I'll put a link right here, and there'll also be a link in the description in the article that goes with this. But to spare you from reading all that, I'm just going to give you the highlights. Battery University gives NMC batteries, which are the Volta batteries, the highest marks for specific energy. Now, think of that as the energy per unit mass, or like the charge per pound, maybe, something like that. They rate the lithium iron phosphate batteries, the Lithionics batteries, highest for safety and lifespan. So now, as far as safety, I don't think either of these battery systems poses a safety hazard. but like the experts, I would give the nod for safety to the lithium-ion iron phosphate battery. In fact, when we visited Lithionics some years ago, they shared some photos with us of their batteries that users had accidentally drilled and driven screws into, and these batteries were fine. So now, if you listen to salespeople, you'll probably hear some other terms thrown about when describing the battery chemistry. It's true, for example, that NMC batteries are the preferred choice for automotive vehicle manufacturers. So you'll hear people throw around things like automotive grade versus consumer grade. And my response to all that would be, so what? That is a meaningless marketing term. There is no ISO definition for an automotive grade battery. And even if there was, it's kind of irrelevant if you think about it. The load in your RV house is going to be different from what you would see in an electric vehicle. So maybe they need different batteries. So if you were trying to accelerate a 3,000-pound vehicle to 60 miles an hour in 4 seconds flat, then yes, the battery with the highest specific energy is probably a very important thing. But if you just want to run your Max Air roof fan overnight, maybe that doesn't require the same kind of performance from the battery. So really, don't pay too much attention to any of those non-specific marketing kinds of terms. So what's my bottom line here on the battery chemistry? Well, both of these chemistries are capable of providing all the power you need to run your RV. No problem. Both of these battery chemistries will last for literally thousands of cycles or years and years of RV use. And you'd really have to want to do it to end of life either of these batteries. And both of these batteries are safe in their chemistries. But if I had to sleep in a swimming pool full of batteries, I would probably want it to be the lithium-ion iron phosphate battery. Okay, so now let's talk about battery voltage. This is another area where the two systems differ. It's the nominal voltage of their battery configuration. Volta systems have a nominal 48-volt battery, and Lithionics systems have a nominal 12-volt battery. Now, in reality, the actual resting voltages of both of those batteries are going to be higher than that nominal rating, but we're going to call them by that nominal size for convenience. And I should note that there's nothing that would really stop Volta from offering a 12-volt system or Lithionics from offering a 48-volt system. The final voltage all has to do with how they connect the individual cells together, and that happens inside the battery case. As an end user, you don't really care. All you know is you see either 12 volts or 48 volts at the terminal when you hook up. Now, in theory, there are a couple advantages to a 48-volt system. The first advantage, and probably the biggest one, has to do with cabling and electrical resistance. Basically, to deliver the same amount of power safely, a 48-volt system can use much smaller cabling than a 12-volt system. The battery cables in our 12-volt system in Lance look like this. I mean, they're kind of as big around as my thumbs. These cables can be big, heavy, and expensive. A 48-volt system can use much smaller cables, which are cheaper, lighter, and easier to work with in a manufacturing situation. But here's the thing with that. So what? As an end user, you don't have more or less fun because your battery scores any theory points. Those advantages in cable weight, cost, and manufacturing, they don't matter to you, the end user. Now, they matter to Winnebago, the manufacturer, for sure. But as an end user, you're buying a working system. And in either of these systems, those considerations of cost and weight and ease of manufacturing, those have already been worked out for you. You, as an end user, should care less if the cables are 4-aught like this one, 2-aught, or even just rolled up strips of aluminum foil. As long as they are safe and do what they need to, and they both work, who cares? And I can vouch that they do in fact work, so who cares about the cable size? There is, however, one distinct disadvantage to a 48-volt system when you use it in an RV. And that's this. For better or worse, right now, it's a 12-volt world in your RV. Pretty much every accessory, gadget, or appliance out there is configured to use 12-volt power, not 48-volt. Your awning, pump, LED lights, refrigerators, anything you can name in your RV is going to be wired for 12 volts DC, as is your RV's chassis. So now in the Volta system, they deal with this by installing a DC to DC converter, which takes the 48 volts produced by the battery that nothing uses and converts it to 12 volts that literally everything else in your RV uses. Most people won't ever need to know or care about the DC to DC converter. It just works, and though it does make a little bit of noise, it's usually quiet enough not to be a bother. But it is an electrical component, so it's something that could fail, and as an electrical component, it's bound to have a little bit of energy loss while it's doing its work. That's just physics. But like I said, most people will never need to care about that. Now, the Lithionics system, on the other hand, is nominally the same voltage as everything else in your RV and everything in your vehicle's chassis. No converter needed. It is a 12-volt baby in a 12-volt world. So I don't want to come across as a curmudgeon. I do recognize the theoretical advantages of the higher DC voltages. But until the rest of the automotive and RV industry catches up and they go there, the 12-volt system, the Lithionics system, has compatibility advantages over the 48-volt system. So what's my bottom line here? Well, both of these battery systems, regardless of voltage, can handle your typical RV loads, so at some point it kind of doesn't matter. The Volta system requires an extra component to do this, and the Lithionics system is more broadly compatible with other RV and automotive components. Okay, so let's talk about battery capacity. And of all the ways the two systems could be different, capacity is one way that they could, if they wanted to, be exactly the same. Now, this is also an area where it's possible to play games or quote different specs or try to massage numbers to match whatever your point of view is, so we need to be careful. The first thing we all need to agree on is that a watt is a watt is a watt. The amount of energy delivered by both of these battery systems can be quoted in watt hours, and the same watt hours are going to provide you completely equivalent amounts of fun in your coach. You're not going to have more or less fun with a Volta watt hour versus a Lithionics watt hour. They're the same. And another thing you need to understand about these systems is that there is a total capacity and a usable capacity, which is always less. You see, each of these battery systems keeps a little something in reserve. Think of it like an insurance policy. This prevents you from completely draining down your battery bank to zero and turning it into a very large paperweight. It also ensures that there's enough power to kind of boot the system back up if you forget something and it kind of runs itself down. This is a good thing, and both of these systems have it. And as a percentage, the size of the reserve is kind of comparable between both systems. It's around 10%. So don't get too hung up on it. Just be aware, though, that if someone quotes you a spec, if someone quotes you a number, be aware which capacity number it is they're quoting you, total versus usable. Okay, so Volta sizes their batteries in modules, and they put the capacities of those module configurations online, and I'll post a link again down in the article. Now, Winnebago offers models with either the 3 or 4 module battery packs. And according to Volta, the total capacity, I'm giving you total, not usable capacity here, of these are 10,100 watt hours and 13,500 watt hours for the 3 and 4 module battery packs. That's not deducting anything for reserve power. Lithionics quotes the sizes of their batteries in amp hours. Now that's kind of old school, and it's how battery sizes have always been listed. We like watt hours better, but that's okay. It's a simple matter to convert from amp hours to watt hours. In the case of Lithionics, you just multiply by 13.33333333, and when you do that, the size of the larger battery option available in the Winnebago Echo comes in at 8,400 watt hours. And again, here we're not deducting anything for reserve power. So, the Volta system, as it comes off the shelf from Winnebago, has greater capacity. More capacity is better here, so obviously the Volta systems win for raw capacity off the shelf. But it's worth pointing out that the Lithionics system is easier for an end user to expand or upgrade because they look like batteries, while the Volta system is securely locked in a big metal box that really doesn't lend itself to end user tinkering. Seriously, if you see anything in your RV that says Volta on it, don't open that box. You don't want to do that. Now, Lithionics has not finalized their upgrade paths for Winnebago Echo owners yet, but they will. And maybe that doesn't matter to you, but it certainly matters to me. And I can tell you that I will absolutely be expanding our battery capacity, and our final capacity is going to wind up greater than the 4-module Volta system offered by Winnebago. I don't know if we're going to get to Stephanie's magical 20,000 watt hour number because, you know, eventually there's like money that comes into play. So everyone needs to decide for themselves how much capacity they really require. And based on our experience, I'll tell you that what you think you need is probably more than what you actually need about 95% of the time. So this is as good a time as any to talk about the elephant on the roof, and that's the air conditioner. When people worry about capacity in an RV lithium system, what they're really asking is, how long can I run my air conditioner? All of your other RV electrical loads are like little gnats on the back of that air conditioner elephant. Air conditioning is literally the only place you're ever going to notice a difference in capacity. So to help you figure this out, here are a couple data points from our own experience. Our RV Lance has a 7,000 watt-hour Lithionics battery. We've been using that without the need for a generator for 4 years. And that is only 83% the size of the battery offered in the Winnebago Echo. We can run the air conditioner in Lance in hard desert conditions for close to 4 hours on battery power. When we were using the 4-module Volta system in Parky, we were able to run the air conditioner, this was in milder conditions, so it was cycling on and off. We were able to run it for a whole day. So those are some data points. Think what you need to about that. But I should point out that you need to consider these things in the context of the coaches they're in. You can't compare the battery systems themselves without the coach. Here's what I mean. With a National Park Foundation Travato, for example, we have a Volta system with a 13,500 watt-hour, and that's total capacity battery, trying to keep it comfortable inside a black metal can. And with the Echo, you have an 8,400 watt-hour battery, trying to keep it comfortable inside basically a Yeti cooler on wheels. So where are you going to be comfortable for longer? My money is on the Yeti cooler with wheels. We won't know this for sure until the summer and we get units out there, but think about the whole system when you think about this. All right, so what is my bottom line here? Well, first off, the raw capacities on the Volta systems offered by Winnebago are higher than the Lithionics systems offered by Winnebago on the Echo. Either one of those options is greater than what Steph and I have been using for 4 years with a pet and without a generator. So they're both fine. The Lithionics system is easier for an end user to expand if you decide you want more capacity. And finally, when you're thinking about how much capacity you need to consider that in relation to the entire coach and all of its systems. Okay, so now let's talk about the alternators. Both the Volta and Lithionics systems feature a second alternator, and both those alternators perform the same basic function. They take a little bit of power from the running engine and they convert it to electricity to charge the large house batteries. We'll start by looking at the Volta alternators. Now, Volta publishes a spec sheet of their alternators online, link below. And we know that the Volta system in the Travato uses the 6,000 watt alternator. So let's use that as an example. The big thing to know about that alternator is that it is a 48 volt alternator. It has to be in order to charge the 48 volt battery. But voltage aside, you should really compare these two systems on watts. Remember, a watt is a watt is a watt. And 6,000 watts is a pretty massive capacity for an alternator. Though I should point out that 6,000 watts is a peak number and not an all the time charge. The alternator should be able to charge at peak that 13,500 watt hour battery from completely empty to completely full in just about 2.5 hours. And I'll be honest, that's really fast. In fact, the fast rate of charging is, in my opinion, the single biggest advantage of the Volta system. And it's that 48 volt architecture that kind of enables the high-speed dance between the alternator and the battery. But there are trade-offs, and in the case of the Volta system, there's one that we found really annoying when it came to the alternator. It doesn't charge the batteries at idle. And by idle, I mean plain old idle, not high idle, which really isn't idle at all unless you normally idle at 2,500 RPMs. When the engine is running at low RPMs, things just aren't moving fast enough to get the power needed from Volta's alternator. So the alternator isn't working for you. This means if you're sitting at a light, you're not charging your battery. If you just start up the engine and sit there, you're not charging your battery. And maybe we're being petty, but this was Steph and my #1 complaint with the Volta system in the time that we had it. Now, to be fair, there is a high idle setting that you can engage with Volta if you want to run a manual charge cycle. It's absolutely not difficult, but it's not like intuitive, like turn on the car and it charges. It's like a click the key fob 3 times, rotate your seat counterclockwise, and hold parking brake down kind of a thing. It's nothing you've ever done in a car before. We did it, we had one for 9 months, and we did it, I think, once for a video. And honestly, when you do that, the high idle noise is kind of just as annoying as a generator would be. Okay, the Lithionics alternator is a heavy-duty automotive alternator from Balmar. You can find the specs on that, again, in a link here. It's the XT series, and it's rated at 170 amps. So if the Balmar can charge the Lithionics battery at a peak of 170 amps, that's somewhere north of 2,200 watts. And that's honestly rather good, but it's not 6,000. So the overall faster charge award is still going to go to Volta. But there's another key piece of information on the Balmar. It charges at idle. It's not clear from the specs exactly what we can expect. It's a kind of up to 140 amps kind of thing, but it is clear that it does charge at idle. Figuring out the specific level that it charges at is going to require some testing on a completed coach, but it is very clear that with the Lithionics system, if you're stuck in traffic, you're charging. If you're idling in a parking lot waiting for your spouse to come out of Starbucks, Steph, you're charging. So what's my bottom line here about the alternators? Well, clearly the Volta system charges the batteries faster. The Volta system will not charge with the engine at idle. We kind of found that annoying. The Lithionics system does charge with the battery at idle. Okay, so now let's talk about the inverter chargers. So what are these and what do they do? Well, they really do 2 things. First, they invert the power, which means they take the DC energy stored in the battery and convert it into AC energy that runs your regular wall plugs. In these Winnebago systems, the inverted power is run to all the outlets in the coach, as well as the air conditioner, the microwave, induction cooktop, anything like that. It's all there. Now, the second thing the inverter charger does is it charges the batteries. If you're plugged into shore power, if you're running a generator, it's going to charge the batteries. Now, in an old-timey RV, they'd probably install something like a 45 amp converter to handle that functions. But nowadays, both of those things are handled by this one AC-DC appliance. Yes, I'm making an AC-DC pun because these things rock. Okay, so let's start with the Volta inverter charger. They put the specs for it online, and you can find them in this link. And again, we'll put that in the description. Now keep in mind that the Volta inverter is a 48 volt to 120 volt inverter because remember, 48 volt batteries. The next thing you should notice on the specs is that it has a maximum capacity of 3,600 watts continuous duty. That is literally every bit of what your shore power connection could provide. So if you can do it with shore power, you can do it with that inverter charger. It is still possible to overload that inverter, but there the considerations aren't any different from what they would be with shore power. And I'll add that the Volta inverter charger has a surge capacity of up to 6,000 watts. So let's say if you're running the microwave and charging a couple laptops and that's the moment that your air conditioner kicks on, it should be able to handle that initial surge no problem. Now that device can also charge the batteries at up to 50 amps. But remember, that's 50 amps at 48 volts, which means it's like a 2,400 watt charger, which is really good. Now, let's get to the main thing I am not so crazy about with the Volta inverter charger. And that's that it is a beast when it comes to standby energy draw. Now, what do I mean by standby draw? Basically, that's how much power does that inverter use without even doing anything? Like if you just turn it on and forget to turn it off? In my opinion, the standby draw on that Volta inverter is high enough to be a nuisance. And I'm not alone here. Current Travato Volta owners have discovered this too, and none of them would recommend that you keep the inverter on all the time when you're not using it. So there is a workaround, and that's it basically. Keep it turned off unless you're actively using it. But let's face it, you're gonna forget. We did. Now, that might not matter depending on the situation. You might have plenty of power to go around, but it is something to think about. Okay, Now, the Lithionics system uses a Xantrex Freedom XC inverter charger. This is a 12-volt appliance, and in the Echo it has a continuous duty capacity of 2,000 watts with a surge rating of 4,000 watts. And it has an 80 amp charge rating, which means it charges a 12-volt system at 960 watts. You can find the specs. Here's another link, and it'll be in the description. Okay, so the specs on the Xantrex inverter charger are somewhat less than the Volta system inverter charger. No debate about that. What does that mean in practical terms? What can you do or not do with that inverter charger? Well, the biggest limitation I see with that is that you're going to have to think a little bit before you run more than one energy hog appliance at a time. And most experienced RVers kind of do this anyway, because there is always some limit that you don't want to go over, even if it's just the 3,600 watts for your shore power connection. So let's say, for example, that your air conditioner is running at a steady state and drawing 1,200 or so watts because you're not in Phoenix in August. Could you run an Instant Pot Mini? Well, that uses about 700 watts. And I want to be clear, I had to look that up because we're not Instant Pot people. Anyway, 1,200 plus 700, that's 1,900. It's less than 2,000, so you should get by with that. Just don't run much else, and it should be okay. Now, Xantrex also makes a model of inverter charger with a 3,000 watt capacity, and it weighs only 19 pounds. And our inverter in Lance weighs 77 pounds. That's kind of like a huge savings. So now, installing something like that upgraded inverter would be a simple upgrade to the system in the Echo. So I'm going to let you guys decide if you think I'm going to wind up doing that or not. But the point is that you can with the Lithionics system because it is a more open system. But honestly, for those of you who aren't me, which I guess is everyone watching this video, I would really recommend giving it a go with the installed inverter before you assume that it's something you need to replace. Because it's very easy to imagine situations where a 2,000 watt inverter, or heck for that matter even a 3,600 watt inverter, just isn't enough. It's easy to imagine those situations, but do they really happen with the way you RV? Now that's something I can't answer for you, and you'll just need to figure out from experience, but you won't get that experience if you don't try it with the installed inverter first. So, my bottom line, the Volta Systems inverter charger is a full 3,600 watts, which absolutely matches the capability of a shore power connection. It will also charge the batteries at a 2,400 watt rate. That's pretty good. The Xantrex inverter, included with the Lithionics system, is smaller at 2,000 watts, and it will charge the batteries at a 960 watt rate. The Lithionics system is a more open and therefore easier to upgrade system, so you could upgrade the inverter charger if you needed to. But before you upgrade anything, make sure that upgrade is really necessary for your style of RVing. Except for me, I always upgrade, and all of you need to tell Steph that it is absolutely necessary for me to upgrade. Okay, so let's talk about systems management, because both of these systems have intelligence built into them to help you out and to prevent you from damaging things. Now, in a lot of ways, the Volta and Lithionics systems are going to do the same things, and you want that. For example, both the Volta and Lithionics systems have intelligence to keep some power in reserve in case you run them down. We've talked about this before, they both do it. Both the Volta and Lithionics systems are smart enough to turn off the second alternator if they're full and if they don't need to be charged. Good thing. Both the Volta and Lithionics systems have limits in them to prevent you from charging a frozen battery. We've all heard that's a bad thing to do with lithium. You don't want to do that. Both systems have the smarts to shut themselves down from charging or even discharging if they hit an over temperature situation. If the battery is too hot, you don't want to charge or discharge it. Both systems have the ability to turn on internal battery heaters, and yes, they both have them, when things start to get cold. And both systems have apps available so that you can get detailed information about the battery right on your smartphone. And there are probably more things that they both do, but those are just the ones that jumped into my head first. So for the most part, all that is good, and I can't really say one BMS is better than the other. I'm sure their official representatives from Volta and Lithionics would be able to tell you more about their BMS and why theirs is awesome, and I don't doubt any of it. But one big difference is that Volta's software takes it upon itself to manage literally everything in the system. It manages the DC to DC converter, the battery cells, the inverter charger, the alternator, all of it. And so if you're like me, you might bump into some of these constraints that they've built in once in a while, and it can feel a little like nannying. Our Lithionics system hasn't exhibited any of that. So a couple examples. The first of these quirks is when you turn on a Volta system, with the one big green button, it also turns on the inverter. Now, as we just mentioned in the Inverter Charger section, you pretty much never want to do that. Best practice would be to turn the inverter on only when you need it, and then turn it off straight away when you're done. This bugged me. If I want the inverter on, I will turn it on myself. Thank you very much. Maybe the Volta system doesn't do this anymore, but ours did, and it was super annoying. Now, the second weirdness that we noticed with the Volta system was when the chassis is running, that means when the car part is turned on, you can't turn off the Volta system. Obviously, that's a real edge case, and obviously that's not going to be a concern for solo travelers, but let's say you happen to be the kind of guy who pulls over and makes your wife drive because you really want to figure out something about the electrical system right now. Then maybe that matters to you. Not that I would know anything about that. Anyway, if someone with a recent Volta system could chime in and let me know if those things still happen, just sound off in the comments because I'm kind of curious as to whether or not those things still happen. All right, so what's my bottom line on the management software? Well, both systems have management software that keeps you from damaging the system, and they both work. That's great. Both systems are protected from over and under temperature conditions. That's fantastic. Both systems have battery heaters. Great. The Volta system manages everything. The less intrusive management style of the Lithionics BMS was a bit more to my taste. Okay, so how do I wrap this up? Well, that's kind of an interesting question since most people probably aren't trying to decide between one or the other because it's not like you can. The Volta system is available on some rigs and the Lithionics system is available on others, like our new Echo. It's not like you can order a rig with one or the other. So I'll say that just broadly, in my opinion, both of these systems will get the job done. So if you're saying to yourself something like, well, I love everything about that coach and I would buy it in a heartbeat if only it had awesome lithium system A instead of awesome lithium system B, you're not doing yourself any favors with that kind of an attitude. I can't think of any scenario where it would make sense to rip one of these systems out and replace it with the other. So in our own search for our next RV, we had a criteria of advanced lithium battery system for our purchase, and either of these systems satisfy that criteria. So what you need to do when you're thinking about this stuff is to consider how you're actually going to use it. But it's very, very important that you're realistic here because you might not know, or you might think you know, but maybe you don't. And so here's where I can give you a couple examples or scenarios from our own experience. So the first scenario, let's start by talking about charging speed, since that's one of the differences between the two. It probably sounds like on paper that the ability to smack your rig into high idle and run a manual charge cycle to charge quickly would be an important capability. And I won't lie, it sounds kind of good to me too. But we have been rolling with a lithium system for 4 years now, and we virtually never want to do that. I can only think of maybe 4 or 5 times when we have turned on the engine just to charge. Why is that? Well, it has to do with how we RV. We never stay put in one place for very long. We like small RVs because we like to be mobile. Go here, see this, ride that, move on to the next thing. So we're driving all the time, and therefore we are charging all the time. Pretty much any time we have ever rolled up someplace in either the Volta or Lithionics rigs, we've been fully charged. Now, if our style of RVing was different, we might feel differently. If our RVing goal was to take our tiny RV someplace and to see how long we could stay there without moving it, then the manual charge thing is going to become more important. Of course, removing all the knives and sharp objects from the RV would also be important for Steph and I under those circumstances too, but that's a different story. So we know that while it sounds good, that manual charge cycle thing just isn't that important for us? Is it important to you? I guess that's all up to you and how much you like to stay put. So another scenario, let's talk about pets. This seems to be a big area of concern when people start thinking about these systems and comparing them to like a generator. And the one thing that comes up all the time here is auto start. Now, since their management software kind of runs the whole show, auto start is available on the Volta system, but I think only on the Travato, not the Bolt. Somebody should check that. Anyway, but it's not available from Winnebago on the Lithionics systems. This might seem like a big deal to you pet owners. Okay, but newsflash, we have a pet too, Mel. And I can tell you, and this is not an exaggeration at all, in the 9 months we had the Volta system, we set up auto start exactly one time. And that was for a video we were making. The rest of the time, and that includes all through the summer, it was a non-issue. We didn't use it, we didn't think about it, and even in our own RV Lance with a smaller lithium system than anything we're talking about in this video, we haven't found ourselves wishing for auto start. Why is that? Well, it isn't because we don't care about Mel, but it's because we've learned a thing or two in our time RVing with lithium power. Like, these things don't take you by surprise and mysteriously and suddenly die on you. You kinda know roughly what your state of charge is and what you can do with it. In fact, if you're curious about auto start at all, just by the fact that you're curious about that, I'm gonna guess that you're the kind of person who panics about charging their phone when it gets down to like 70%. But your phone doesn't randomly die on you either. You kinda know how it works and about how long you can go. And the same thing is gonna happen with your lithium system. And you're gonna find yourself in sync with your system's capabilities pretty quickly. And if you're worried about your pets enough to think about auto start, I'm gonna also guess you're not the kind of pet parent who wants to leave their pet locked in a small RV all the time anyway. So that whole panic about the air staying on for 8 hours at a time, it doesn't happen in our world. All right, so here's a final thought. If I decided that auto start was really, really super important, don't think for a minute that's an unsolvable problem with a Lithionics system. Remote start is a readily available aftermarket accessory for most vehicles today. Lance can actually do it. Now, I just have to trigger it manually. Given that the Lithionics system is more open, I have no doubt I could figure out some sort of auto start if I really wanted to. Or, at the very least, I could just have something warn me when I needed to remotely start the rig manually. So, those are just a couple scenarios. You really need to think about all this stuff and about how you RV, and then you can start to see how these systems will play into that. But don't go full doomsday right off the bat. You know, think about like 90% of the time what's going to happen. All right, so let me leave you with a quick final comparison. The main advantages of the Volta system are it charges faster, the out-of-the-box batteries supplied by Winnebago have greater capacities. As supplied by Winnebago, the Inverter Charger has a greater capacity, and some Volta systems include auto start and the ability to initiate a manual high idle charging cycle. The main advantages of the Lithionics system are it uses a safer battery chemistry, and they're very proud of their safety. In fact, and this is a quote, Lithionics battery is the world's first to achieve full UL listing. That's Underwriters Laboratories, the same people that rate everything electric, for both stationary and motive applications. This includes failing safely under multiple, fully destructive test methods, which means they trashed batteries, which would have been awesome fun, and I wish I would have been there. And I actually took that from their website, so you can go check it out on their safety if you don't believe me. Another advantage of the Lithionics system is it does not require extra components like DC to DC converters. It's more broadly compatible with auto and RV accessories because it is a 12-volt system. It charges your batteries at idle, and it's much easier to add capacity or frankly to make any modifications at all because it's not a closed system. And I'm not kidding myself, that last one is a very important advantage to me personally because I love modifying RVs, and I am super excited that Winnebago has decided to include a Lithionics battery system in the new Winnebago Echo, which will be our next RV. I can't wait to get my hands on one and see just how far I can take things. It's gonna be awesome. Okay, if you've made it this far, congratulations. I love you, and I hope you've learned something. I guess I gotta stop for now. This is James from the Fit RV. We'll see you on the road. Bye.